Hello, everybody. How are you doing today? Everybody feeling good? Awake, had lunch, maybe coffee, caffeine, tea, whatever is your pick me up? All right, fabulous. So, hi everyone, esteemed colleagues. We really welcome you to today's session. And first of all, a very kind and warm thanks for being here today. My name is Jamie Wen-Besson, and I am a Senior Gender Program Manager with the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And we are a proud co-founder of the JADA and Environment Data Alliance, or JADA, as well as a co-convener alongside the Women's Environment and Development Organization, WEDO. So we started as 17 co-founding organizations in 2021, and today we number over 100 member organizations and data advisors. And together we are dedicated to building collective knowledge and action to increase the production and use of gender and environment data. So knowledge is power. So we're really pleased to form our distinct perspectives into a powerful platform to support you, the stakeholders, and leaders. And so today we're convened together to discuss the power of gender data for prioritization and transparency, as this workshop's core themes are focusing on nationally determined contributions and also the biennial transparency reports. So today we're going to work together to exchange knowledge, best practices on gender and environment data and tools. We're going to discuss the current gaps and the proposed actions to strengthen gender responsive and climate policies. And we'll also talk about enhancing transparency and accountability on implementation itself. So this workshop is led by JADA alongside the COP28 UAE presidency as some of the co-organizers of last year's global conference on gender and environment data, where we convened over 200 people for 2 days in Dubai, and we validated and announced a global call to action. Within that global call to action, as a reminder, we called for 5 key priorities that focused on the ethical and inclusive production, use, and uptake of gender and environment data. We called for increased finance and also the strengthening of our multi-stakeholder partnerships for gender and environment data itself. So now with our sessions today, as parties are working on their first BTRs that are due at the end of this year, and of course parties are also updating their NDCs for February 2025, we are here to enhance gender responsiveness in these processes through gender environment data as a lens. As such, the focus of this workshop is to foster knowledge and information sharing among all of you, our dear participants. And we also have many of our JADA members here at COP29 who have also been invited to support this workshop by bringing in their tailored and specific expertise. So with this, we're just going to do a really brief run through on how today is going to be formatted. First, we're going to have a scene-setting presentation from Angie Daze from IISD, a JADA co-founding member and current steering committee member. We're then going to break into 2 interactive sessions. Each will be divided into 3 thematic groups. Each breakout will be led by a facilitator or co-facilitator and supported by rapporteurs. The first session will be focused on gender and climate dimensions, while the second will be focused on thematic climate streams. Each session will have a quick overview from your facilitators, and then you will join the group of your choosing. In the back of the room, you'll see 3 tables with flip charts there. This is your session, so we encourage you to share your knowledge and experiences with all of us. We'll then reassemble. We'll hear from JADA leaders and co-organizers from last year's data conference on some tools to note that will help support the BTRs and the NDCs, and those presentations will be provided by UN Women, IUCN, and WEDO. And then we'll, of course, close by having a report back from the breakouts from your facilitators and rapporteurs. And as an outcome of today's session, your comments will be documented in a reporting template, and co-organizers will publish the findings and the outcomes with an aim to hopefully also inform others. So without delay, let's get started by welcoming Angie Daze from IISD, the Director of Gender Equality and Social Inclusion for Resilience. Thank you for the scene setter, Angie.
Thanks so much, Jamie, and thanks to everyone who's been involved in putting this session together. I know it's going to be a really great conversation that we're going to have over the next 80 minutes or so. And it's really an honor and a pleasure to be here representing JADA today. As Jamie mentioned, we were a founding member and we sit on the steering committee, and we're really proud of being part of this group of like-minded and really amazing collaborators. Gender responsive and inclusive climate action is a significant focus area of our work, and we're really excited about the work of JADA now and its potential into the future. And as a think tank, we're strongly committed to evidence-based decision making, and so the role of gender and environment data in this climate action space is really, really important to us. So as Jamie mentioned, we're going to focus today on nationally determined contributions and biennial transparency reports. And we recognize that many of us follow specific parts of these negotiations, and we all play, different roles in our countries and in our organizations. So I'm just going to give a really brief scene setter to kind of get us all on the same page about what we're talking about. Sorry. So I think it's really great that JADA is helping to convene this conversation, because our focus is really on connecting the dots between the people generating gender and environment data and the people who need it. And in this case, it's the people and institutions who are leading the processes around NDCs and BTRs that can really benefit from drawing on the gender data that's already out there. And they can also create demand for generation of additional data at the nexus of gender, environment, and climate change. So looking at NDCs and BTRs, why are they important? Well, they're key pieces of the puzzle that's been established of all these processes and instruments that are designed to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. And as a reminder, the Paris Agreement includes goals for both mitigation and adaptation, for the first time placing adaptation on a level footing with mitigation in this process. NDCs and BTRs are connected and they're complementary. The NDCs are countries' commitments to implementing the Paris Agreement, and the BTRs are their reports on progress in implementing it. And both are really important for the global stocktake, which is the agreed upon process for assessing progress towards the long-term goals of the Paris Agreement. So just a quick overview of the basics of NDCs. They were established in the Paris Agreement in 2015, and they focused on mitigation in terms of countries making quantitative commitments to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But many countries did choose to include an adaptation commitment or adaptation-related commitments in their NDCs, recognizing both that it's important in the Paris Agreement and that it's important more broadly for protecting communities, ecosystems, economies from the impacts of climate change, and particularly in more vulnerable countries and low-emitting countries. So NDCs are updated every 5 years with the expectation that countries are going to increase their ambition on emissions reductions with each consecutive commitment. And as Jamie mentioned, countries will be submitting the third iteration of their NDCs in 2025. So there's an opportunity to improve on what has already been submitted. Another thing to note is that NDCs are commitments, so they do tend to present fairly high-level information, and they go hand in hand with other pieces of this process, including national adaptation plans, long-term low emissions development strategies, nationally appropriate mitigation actions that sort of elaborate how countries will achieve the commitments that they're setting out in their NDCs. Turning to BTRs. So these were established in 2018 under the Enhanced Transparency Framework, and they're to be submitted every 2 years, starting this year, though only a handful of countries have completed them so far, and we're already mid-November, so we'll see. BTRs are meant to include information on progress on NDCs, as well as adaptation, loss and damage, the support that's been received and provided, and a number of other issues. So the scope of the BTRs is broader than the NDCs, but there are strong linkages between the two. So just looking at what's in the decision texts related to NDCs and BTRs, there is some recognition of the importance of integrating gender issues. There wasn't anything in the original decision on NDCs, but there was guidance developed in 2018 that referenced gender responsiveness specifically in relation to planning processes undertaken to develop the NDC and around the engagement of local communities and Indigenous peoples. For BTRs, there's a request for parties to provide information on how gender perspectives are integrated into adaptation, and they also acknowledge the need for gender balance in the expert teams that will be reviewing the BTRs. These are really important entry points, but they're obviously inadequate. Gender is not only relevant for adaptation, but across all of the different streams of climate action. And it requires more than just engagement of local communities and Indigenous peoples, though of course this is essential. So why does gender matter for NDCs and BTRs? If we include gender information in these instruments in a coherent and systematic manner, we can continue to raise the profile of gender issues within the UNFCCC process. And this is really important because we want to reduce the silos between the discussions on gender and all of these other critical processes that countries are engaged in. Integrating gender in NDCs and BTRs, it also helps to build the evidence base on what works, what doesn't in relation to integrating gender. And it establishes a more solid foundation for gender-responsive climate action going forward. Lastly, it creates accountability for making climate action gender-responsive. If countries make gender issues a priority in their NDCs, this is an important statement of their commitment. And if they're assessing and reporting on progress with a gender lens, this can help to illuminate some of the inequities in benefits from climate action, and it can generate learning for better policies and processes as they move through these iterative cycles. So I hope you're now convinced that gender should be part of NDCs and BTRs. So how do we get there? Gender and environment data plays a really key role. According to JADA, this is data related to the environment and climate change that is disaggregated by gender and or sex, and that reflects gender issues. And importantly, gender considerations are also reflected in the methodologies for data collection, analysis, and use. So I just want to close with a few thoughts on the role that gender and environment data can play in NDCs and BTRs. And this isn't comprehensive, it's just to sort of give a bit of food for thought for the discussions that are going to come. So gender and environment data can tell us about who has participated in BTR and NDC processes if we assume that these processes are participatory. Collecting disaggregated data can help to illuminate how inclusive and how meaningful the engagement was. It can tell us about the gender differentiated impacts of climate change and why these matter for the commitments countries are making and how progress is assessed. It can unearth the gender-related barriers to participating in climate action. And last but not least, it helps us to determine whether the outcomes from investments in climate action are equitable or not. And I'll stop there. Thanks very much, and really looking forward to the discussions that are coming.
Thank you so much, Anzi. So now that we have our baseline for our sessions, let's just dive straight into the breakouts. Session 1 addresses gender and climate dimensions. So let's actually one by one have our session facilitators come up to the stage. And let's hear first from Sadia Sati from the Sustainable Development Policy Institute. And she'll shed a little bit of light for us on women's economic security and care in the climate context. There's my
Good afternoon, everyone, and very welcome to the breakout session number 1, which is Women, Economic Security and Care in the Context of Climate Change. So in 15 minutes, we will explore the critical intersection of gender, economic security and environment challenges, particularly how climate change disproportionately affect women and girls. So as we all know, projections indicate that due to the existing economic disadvantages and reliance on the natural resources for their livelihoods, women are at the heightened risk of poverty and food insecurity as climate change intensifies. For instance, 1 in 10 women lives in extreme poverty, and in current trends continue, million will remain below the poverty line by 2030. So women are often overrepresented in informal employment. Nearly 60% of women globally work in the sector, which typically offers limited access to the social protection and financial resources. This lack of access not only restricts their economic opportunity, but also diminishes their their ability to adopt the climate-related changes. In addition to these economic barriers, women bear the disproportionate burden of unpaid care work as climate change exacerbates resources scarcity, such as the water and fuel. Women are likely to spend even more time in caregiving tasks. So this situation limits their ability to engage in paid work or participation in decision-making processes. Some of the key issues like economic disadvantages and unpaid care work, we will be discussing some brief question, which is the like what are these issues in your countries, in your context, and what gender environment data exist and what need to be collected. So we will be discussing this question in group 1. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Sadia. And now for breakout 2, let's hear from Shavi Bandari from the George Institute for Global Health on gender-based violence and women's health in the climate context.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you, Jamie. So in the breakout 2 room, we will be discussing gender-based violence and women's health in the context of climate change. To give you a little bit of context, research indicates a rise in gender-based violence during and after climate-related disasters, be it sudden events like hurricanes or slow-onset events like droughts. Incidents are also reported in emergency shelters. Climate-induced degradation, deforestation, and scarcity increases the risk of sexual violence for women as well, who are performing traditional roles like water and firewood collection because they now have to travel longer distances. Additionally, economic stress and deteriorating livelihoods contribute to increased domestic violence. And finally, climate change also impacts women's health in gender-specific ways. Rising salinity levels in drinking water sources in coastal areas of Bangladesh, for example, are known to lead to more cases of preeclampsia and miscarriages. Additionally, shifting patterns of vector-borne diseases pose risks to newborns and miscarriages. All in all, this area remains quite under-researched with limited data on connections between climate change and women's health. So our discussion questions for today will be what specific issues exist in your context or country, what gender environment data currently exists, and what are the gaps? So what additional data needs to be collected to better understand these issues? I look forward to your participation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Shavi. And also for breakout 3, let's hear from Claudia Rubio from WeDo on women's climate leadership and cross-cutting gender mainstreaming processes.
Hi, all. Pleasure to be here and pleasure to see you all. So breakout 3 is on women's leadership and on gender mainstreaming processes. So I think this is also, and like very clear to make the connection that when we're talking about women's leadership, we're also talking about women's participation. Because if we can't participate, we can't really have any leadership role. So basically in this breakout session, we want to also discuss what that context is, what like enables us to participate and what like doesn't allow us to participate, and what leadership, how do we see that leadership? Because we've seen that women's leadership like does enable better outcomes, leads to more conservation efforts, demonstrates better governance, but it's not only that, it's not only that, it's our human rights. So like, what does it mean that we're not participating enough in these spaces? Even like in the UNFCCC, we've seen a decrease from 2020 to 2023 in women's participation. So how does gender environment data help us to understand this and then craft solutions that consider this? And also, what processes exist that we need to consider as we think about women's leadership and women's participation? So that's the overview of the session, and please join and let's chat, and yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Claudia. So first, can we give a quick round of applause for our co-facilitators here? Thank you so much. Okay, so now is where we get into the interesting interactive part of this session. We're going to ask you all to break up into groups of your choosing. So as you know, of course, there's groups 1, 2, and 3 addressing women's economic security, GBB and health, and women's leadership participation. So group 1 will be over here, group 2 in the center, and group 3 on this side of the room. So right now, I encourage all of you to get up, find the table of your choosing, and you will meet with your co-facilitators as well as your rapporteurs, and this is your session. You have 15 minutes in this group. We realize it's a short amount of time, but we hope that that will incentivize a lot of ideas and a lot of contributions that we will record and document and share back. So thank you, and I'll see you back in about 15 minutes. All right, everyone, we're at time. So thank you so much. I know there's a lot of discussion going on, but please hold those thoughts because this session will flow into the next one. So there is ample time for us to make sure to dive into that. So let's have everyone stay where we are because we're all cozy and we've all, of course, rearranged everything to our comfort. So let's leave it there. But if I can ask the next three co-facilitators to come up to give a quick introduction, that will be fantastic. So if I can have Mariam, Genevieve, and Diego. And as a reminder, hold on to your thoughts because we're going to take everything from the first session and we're going to feed them now through the lens of three thematic streams. Okay. All right, thank you so much. So to get session 2 started, let's please welcome Mariam Ibrahim from the Development Transformations, and let's hear a little bit about gender and climate mitigation. Mariam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone, and it's really lovely to be part of this very important conversation. I think for this next session, we really want to focus on specific actions and think about the various dimensions that we've just looked at and linking now with this climate stream. So on mitigations, that's just to set the context as we go into that discussion. We know there are impacts when it comes to gender equality from mitigation. There could be some positive outcome if we are able to incorporate gender elements into the NDCs and also the monitoring through the reports. Think about economic opportunities, when we transition to renewable energy and green technology and women's participation in this sector and how this can empower women economically. We've had issues from the breakout session on health outcomes, and mitigation is really about reducing air pollution from fossil fuel, and this could directly benefit women's health, particularly in regions where women are more exposed to indoor air pollution, and then energy access as well. And reducing the burden of women who often spend hours collecting biomass for cooking and heating. If the other thing is that we should also think about the exclusion from decision making, which one of the groups has looked at, particularly if you think about the planning and policy processes and looking at the unique needs and contributions that may be overlooked when we're talking about transportation policies that are focusing on electric vehicles, for example, and then not addressing women's reliance on public transport, job creation, displacement risks. So for this session, when we're thinking about the different dimensions and how we can apply on these two mitigation, it's just for us to think about a coordinated effort across various actors. So if we have policymakers in the room, we have civil society, academia. So how can we bring in gender and environment data, looking at these different dimensions when we're focusing on mitigation? Thank you.
Thank you, Mariam. Okay, and next we have Genevieve Moancy from Mission Inclusion telling us a little bit about gender and climate adaptation.
Thank you so much. So, hi everyone, nice to be here. Very excited to talk about adaptation and how can we ensure from a gender perspective point of view that we really work onto adaptation in our project. So I think that what came across in this cup in all the discussion is that sometimes the gender is far from the different actions that we're doing. So in adaptation, how can we make sure that the data, whether it is disaggregated and all of that, really informs BTR, the NDC, and also the national adaptation plans. So how can we work on that? What do we need as from our different positions and role to ensure that the data is informed in that way? So I think that we all know that adaptation is key in the current situation. So we need to face how can we make sure that with the value of the data and the data that we're trying to collect, we really focus on to put that gender approach in our data collection. So that's it for now. So I invite you to come into the adaptation group to join the discussion on this.
Great, thank you so much. And so next we're going to hear from Diego de Leon from Out for Sustainability on gender and loss and damage.
Hello, perfect. Thank you so much, Jamie, and to all the organizers of this great event. First of all, good afternoon. And as we address loss and damage caused by climate change, we must acknowledge that the impacts are not experienced equally by everyone. Women, girls, and marginalized populations often face heightened vulnerability due to systemic inequalities. However, a critical gap persists on our understanding of these disparities, and that's where gender disaggregated data enters. A recent analysis conducted in the United States looking at the LGBTQ plus displacement due to extreme weather events showed that for example, 32% of displaced LGBTQ plus individuals never return home, in comparison with only 12% of the cisgender heterosexual individuals. This, of course, is a result of compounding vulnerabilities, higher rates of food insecurity, unsanitary conditions, and just long-term displacement. Of course, the study was done at a national census level, so of course these impacts were more pronounced in states where there are active anti-LGBTQ plus legislation. So also talking about the political environment. Here, gender disaggregated data shows kind of why it's critical for undercovering all these inequalities and ensuring that no one is left behind. However, on a more positive note, this same study was presented to the Senate in the state of California, and I'm very excited to share that because of that, the Senate of the state of California, with the approval of the governor, recently passed a law, SB Senate Bill 90, where, based on this study, now mandates that emergency response plans explicitly protect LGBTQ plus individuals and that they are consulted during and after an extreme weather event so that their needs and experiences are incorporated in any future plan or program that is developed. So again, it was because of data that in this case specifically on loss and damage and human displacement, that we were able to make a policy change that integrates those voices that had been historically marginalized and because of that invisible.
Great, thank you so much. So once again, let's please give a quick round of applause for our co-facilitators. And just like in the last session, you will choose the group of your choosing, so you don't have to stay where you're currently physically located. You can move across the room. We encourage you to. So group number 1 over there will be dealing with mitigation. Group 2 here in the center on adaptation. And group 3 here on the end of the room on loss and damage. So just like last time, you'll have about 15 minutes to kind of collect, discuss, debate, and we highly encourage that you take some of the inputs from the previous session and start slotting them into these as well, so that we make connections between the dimensions of gender and climate change alongside these climate streams. So the session's now yours. You have 15 minutes. All right, thank you everyone. I know there's still a lot of conversations going on, but we do need to move on time. So if I can start to ask Amy, Laura, and Claudia to join us on stage. As you guys are wrapping final thoughts, we'll get ready for the last segments. Thank you. All right, thank you so much, everyone. I know there's a lot to discuss, and hopefully we can continue the discussions after the event. But for the time being, let's give all of our amazing co-facilitators and rapporteurs a few moments to go through everything. And thank you. And in the meantime, let's turn our attention to the stage. We'll hear a few very short presentations from some colleagues about some tools that you may consider in these next months as we're thinking about NDCs and BTRs. So first, we're going to hear from Amy Reggers from UN Women.
All right, everybody. I'm going to get started in the hope that you're swiveling your chairs back around. And as Jamie said, in the interest of giving the rapporteurs some time to prepare their summaries. So thanks very much for having us here. My name's Amy Reggers from UN Women, and I'm just going to briefly share with you some of the resources that we have on gender and environment data. So as you all very well aware, I'm sure, that until recently, very little data existed on women and men and the environment, partly because of a lot of environmental data focuses on CO2 emissions, historically. But in recent years, increasingly, we're seeing more of this, and UN Women has supported national statistics offices to really look at measuring the gender and environment nexus. And that support has been to collect new data, as well as reprocessing of existing data. And you can see here, this is one of our recent publications on gender and biodiversity. And you can also see here some of the findings. I'm not going to go into much detail at all. One interesting finding, which has been quite consistent, is some clear connections between aridity and child marriage. So, for example, in arid areas of a country, child marriage rates are higher than in more humid areas. And this goes across regions and is more pronounced in some regions than others. So you can see here some of the existing tools that we have. So beyond, as I said, analysing some existing data, we also have this sort of package set, which really supports national surveys on gender and environment. And it covers a range of different areas like disasters, environmental livelihoods, green jobs, ownership of environmental assets, and so on. And it's a suite of tools, and it can produce up to 100 gender and environment indicators. And just to give you sort of a quick snapshot of one of the recent surveys that we have done in Samoa that just finished up. So some statistics around women being more likely than men to sacrifice nutrition. And then you can also see here in terms of time spent on unpaid care work. Some of the other work we've done in terms of using multiple data sources, so in partnership with the Parity Centre, we've done some forecasting work on the effects of climate change on poverty and food insecurity for women and men, and you can see some of the results here on a worst climate path scenario, how significant some of those disparities would actually be. And then we've also got, just to flag, this dashboard that's actually can be useful in terms of thinking about how to use this data and how we can look at some of this evidence so that when we can implement gender-sensitive measures, what sort of mitigating factors we could have and how we could reduce what is potentially a worst-case scenario. So let me stop here and hand it over to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Amy. And I think that's a fantastic presentation that demonstrates with all the visuals and information how data and making those connections can actually help drive not only policy, but policy action. So on that note, I'd like to introduce Laura Sabator from IUCN to talk a little bit about that intersection as well. Laura, over to you.
Thank you so much. At IUCN, gender and environment data production and use is one of our key priorities. And thank you so much. So what I want to present today is this brief that we just launched together with the Kashtag Institute and UN Women. We are developing a gender equality and climate policy scorecard, which is a monitoring tool to keep track of government's progress on the implementation of their national gender and climate policy commitments. It will be focused on 2025 update of the NDCs as I started, and then also looking at financial mechanisms and how countries are being implementing these commitments that they are making in their NDCs. So what we have here today and that you can see in the screen is a brief that we have produced looking at the methodology of the Gender Equality and Climate Policy Scorecard to provide governments some insights on what the methodology is, what is it that we are going to be tracking, but most importantly, also giving them a heads up on what are those key areas that they should be looking at to enhance gender responsiveness within their NDCs. So as you can see in the image of the cover of this publication, what we are looking at is women in all their diversity, women across their, all the dimensions across the entire lives, which is something that is very important because normally we look at women as either vulnerable or we talk about women's leadership, but we might not be talking about, for example, the impact of climate change in women's health, unpaid care work, and also on gender-based violence. So here very quickly we have the dimensions of this gender equality and climate policy scorecard. And what we have done in the brief is briefly including a set of questions and also some country examples of countries that are already addressing and including commitments to address these intersections within their current NDCs. So all the questions are grouped into looking at, for example, in case of women's economic security, is the country identifying women's unequal access to and control over resources, goods, services, but most importantly also, do they recognize as well women's contributions from the economy sector to climate action? And are there any actions that they are taking within their NDCs to address the gaps and also promotes women's leadership within this space? Same second dimension on equal distribution of unpaid care and domestic work, of also looking at the unequal distribution, whether that's identified and recognized, but also looking at how women within their unpaid care work are contributing and can contribute to climate action and whether there are actions looking at that. Then the third and the fourth dimensions look at the safety from gender-based violence and also safeguarding women's health. So also looking at those 3 points on recognizing the impacts of climate change, but also women's roles and leadership into these spaces and whether countries are taking action or not. And the same for the fifth dimension on women's leadership and participation. And finally, we do have a sixth cost-cutting dimension that looks at gender mainstreaming frameworks, tools, and processes, looking at how these processes, these tools are being used across all the other 5 dimensions and how all the other 5 dimensions are integrated as well within these processes. So does like NDCs being conducted in a consultative process? Are there enabling frameworks? Are they using gender responsive monitoring and evaluation, indicators, budgeting, etc.? So looking also at those. So that's the focus of this brief to inform NDCs, and the scorecard will go a step beyond that and then look at, through these dimensions, also looking at what are countries implementing and to see where are the gaps to enhance transparency and accountability for countries. So I'm just gonna leave these here. You can see there the QR code to scan the document, and you can also find some of those in the table by the door. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Laura. And speaking about advice for parties and countries as they're looking at their NDCs, let's also turn it over to Claudia from WeDo to talk a little bit about some work that WeDo has been also doing in this space.
Thank you, Jamie. So I'll talk about 2 tools within WeDo. We have 1, the screening tool and resource guide, and 2, the gender climate tracker. I had caught brain, so I didn't put a QR code, so please come close to me and reach out if you want access, if you want the link to either of these tools, and I'm happy to send through email, through WhatsApp, through whatever works. So starting first with the Gender Climate Tracker. The Gender Climate Tracker is a platform that we have within WeDo that basically tracks several components, including women's participation within the UNFCCC, what decisions within the UNFCCC mention gender, and finally, where gender appears within the NDCs. So if you have curiosity about any of these, please reach out, please check it out. But specifically for the NDCs, we try to track where gender is within each NDC and how it shows up. So basically, in this tracker, we have the reference, any existing to or any reference to gender or woman, what type of reference this is, if it's if it's like a gender, is it gender sensitive, is it gender responsive, what type of reference it is exactly. Then we have the context of the NDC, so what context do we have to consider that women are being integrated, that these gender integrations are being considered in. And then we have a participation process, because it's not only like how does gender appear within the NDC, it's also what process was taken to include women within the development of the NDC. So that tracker has like both components. And basically the idea of the tracker is like it's basically like us to understand where gender is within our within our NDCs, so that we can advocate for our governments and we can have the information. Because as we'll be talking like across so many tables, with the data, we can actually craft solutions. So we understand where gender appears, we can say, okay, in my first NDC, gender appeared in this way, and it was less significant or more significant. In my second NDC, gender appeared even more significantly or even less significantly. So what does that mean for how my country is considering gender? So this is how we inform our advocacy and how we inform our advocacy. So that's on the Gender Climate Tracker. Then on the tool that we developed towards NDC, we developed a tool called Towards Gender Just Nationally Determined Contributions. So basically, this tool provides a checklist for countries to see if their NDC is gender just. Here we have multiple components and like several things that we wanted to focus on, and we provide key questions that allow us to see if our NDC is gender just, and key resources that are linked. So the components here are process, principles, ambition, data, coherence, and accountability. In each of these, you can jump into exactly what we mean when we talk about each of these and on the relevant resources for each one. The idea with this is that countries can see their NDC and basically evaluate, okay, I'm considering data, but I'm not really considering data like in an inclusive manner or an intersectional manner. So what does that mean for the NDC that I'm producing? The tool has a checklist, so it's like easy, dynamic, fun in my mind, maybe not in everyone's mind, but it's supposed to be a useful, interesting tool for everyone. So yeah, let me know, and I can provide any links. Thank you.
Great, let's give a quick round of applause for all of our presenters. Hopefully you find the tools useful, accessible, and definitely connect with any of the organizers or speakers questions about those. So in the meantime, can I ask all of our co-facilitators to come up? Sadia, Xavi, Claudia, Mariam, Genevieve, and Diego. And we'll switch. And we're going to ask each of our facilitators to just give a quick, let's say 2-minute kind of overview of some of the key discussion points and key messages for us to take away from today. And we also have our rapporteurs. So in case the rapporteurs are coming to do the report back instead, let's also welcome them. So if I could have everyone take a seat in order. Yeah, you all fit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if you have a rapporteur with a co-facilitator, of course, sharing is caring. Okay, so in the interest of time, let's go ahead and get started. Can you walk us through session 1, please? You have a microphone right next to you.
Yeah, so our group was the first one group was on the economic security of the women's, and it comprised almost 10 to 15 women and one male person. So we have a different perspective from different countries, and mostly the developing context of the countries on the gender data. The first question was on the economic empowerment of the women. So most of the NDCs there was an incredible example from the Brazil that one of our member has mentioned, that they have submitted their NDCs 2 days ago, 3.0, and most of the countries have to submit their NDCs in 2025 February. She critically analyzed that, and she said that the gender inclusive data is mentioned, but how it would be working on implementation part is missing. And there was also the suggestion from most of the countries that there should be an inclusive gender should be added in their upcoming NDCs. And also, there are also, lack of, if you're talking about the adolescent girls, do we have e-mobility facility for them from schools to home? So that data, or also on the cook stoves and all that data is missing from the first part of the NDCs. While coming to the second part, there is a lack of a financial plan, or the climate finance plan, that it was missing from the NDCs, and also how this financial mechanism should be trickled down towards the gender data is missing in most part of the countries. And also, on most of the countries, they don't have subsectoral data on the woman. Which sector of the mitigation or adaptation in NDC's part should be part of the how they can be part of their next NDCs, and how such part of women are added in the NDCs. So that was from the group 1.
Great, thank you. Laura, can you walk us through group 2 on health and GBV?
Yes, very quickly on group 2, what was the focus of our conversation was on gender-based violence, and how across different countries they have been seeing an increase on gender-based violence. And for example, studies being conducted in Brazil on the impact of droughts on increased gender-based violence and domestic violence. Also references to how gender-based violence, or when communities are displaced due to climate change, there is not enough protection in shelters to prevent gender-based violence, and also access to services for women's health. We did not touch that much on women's health data, which indicates that that might be where more research is needed on women's health, how climate change is impacting women differently from men, especially in the case of, for example, like pregnant women or breastfeeding women. So I think that's an area for more work. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Shivi, over to you on group 3.
Thank you. So Group 3 was focusing on women's leadership and cross-cutting gender mainstreaming processes. And a lot of time rightfully was spent on discussing the importance of intersectionality as well as the lack of. We did talk about that there are boundaries in kind of who we define as women in leadership as well. So the need for more local grassroots leadership to step in as well. There was a bit of focus on, what are the indicators that are needed for us to get a better picture of women in participation. For example, at COP, is it just kind of how many women are in the room, but actually where does the power lie? How many women as head of delegations? And there were partners who've been kind of working on this for quite a long time. We also spoke about that what is the story of those who are not in the room and why, and what are the barriers. So I think a little bit of perspective on how do we bridge these conversations once we step out of COP. And the last one was that, which we all know, but data is important for decision making. So how is it being captured in terms of feeding into policy design and then implementation. So thank you to everyone who contributed to that.
Great, thank you so much, Sivi. And let's pass it over to Mariam to tell us a little bit about mitigation.
Thank you. I think the first observation we made as a group is that there was very little interest on mitigation. Our group was really small, but that also meant we had a really intimate discussion and conversation, really rich conversation on mitigation. And the first thing, of course, as we were making that observation is thinking about the importance of mitigation on women and particularly on energy access. Most women who are running households, particularly in the rural areas, and all the various issues around green jobs. So I think it was important just to recognize that as a start in our group. So the discussions were rich, but I'll just summarize it or condense it into 3 main points. One was about the importance of bridging silos. And this is bridging silos and having coordination across various sectors. So we talked of government, but also civil society. From a government perspective, the importance of having these national frameworks when it comes to data governance and that disaggregation of data and various indicators. So for relevant ministries like the Ministry of Environment or Gender to look at increasing the quality of data, but also to harmonize and bring those various indicators together would be important. So that means you look at gender data much more holistically and also link mitigation with adaptation, because that would also help to really emphasize the importance of mitigation in the long term. So that's one of the suggestions that came from the group. A lot of emphasis also on capacity building, on awareness raising for various stakeholders, so issues around energy poverty, for example, and on capacity building also of parliamentarians, of government officials. We assume that this is an issue when it comes to gender data that they are well versed in, but that was one of the areas that we highlighted where there was need for action. And we also need to do more in terms of case studies to showcase the importance of the use of that gender disaggregated data. Because it's one thing to just collect, but then if you don't have studies that then shows the differentiated impacts based on that data, it would not increase the collection of that data. Then it's not just about the quantity of data that we have, it's also about the quality of the data. And that's really important to emphasize, including looking at having sector disaggregated data that then informs the evidence-based interventions. There are some examples of how women face different impacts, and if we could have that kind of sector-informed and really good quality data that has been missing, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And let's hear from Genevieve on adaptation, please.
Thank you very much, Jamie. So first of all, I just want to thank everyone that was on the table for adaptation. It was really great to have those sharing. So in a quick summary, what I want to say is maybe just the key words first. So we had a lot of discussion around the different contexts and community-driven really approaches. Also, the concept of how can we circulate back to the communities the information and the data that is collected. Then we also talked about how can we stop the top to bottom, sometimes when it's from the national government. This is how it goes. How can we take really from the communities themselves to the people that are deciding. And then we talked about multi-sectorial, multi-generational, and multi-actors group that really take into account all the different stakeholders from the communities, from the region, and up to the national level. And how can we make sure that these conversations are really going? I think there's a lot to do, and we really need to move and make sure that it goes across the different generations and across also beyond the different communities. So maybe I'll stop here because I know we're short of time, but I really want to thank everyone, and we will read down everything. So if there's anything, I think we can use that information again. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Diego.
Thank you so much, and thank you to our note taker, Jenny, and to everyone that participated in the table. On loss and damage, I think there was a general awareness that this is a topic that is by itself very hard to measure, so it is very hard to generate data that's reliable, and that it's disaggregated, and that it's intersectional. It is a very significant challenge. Additionally, there is not necessarily an enabling policy framework that allows that data to be collected, much less to be incorporated into the actual policy instrument. NDCs by themselves do not necessarily incorporate matters related to loss and damage, and BTRs do, but there's still a lack of understanding and awareness of what that data actually looks like, much less on how can we disaggregate it. There is also this discussion about it being kind of an afterthought. Usually loss and damage is related to immediate impacts. There's, of course, the discussion on slow onset events, but the reality is that the majority of the attention, action, and support and resources go into a moment of emergency, and then it is actually very difficult to be able to collect that disaggregated data. And at the end, also, how can we work with governments from civil society in order to encourage them to be much more proactive, be much more intentional on trying to collect this data, but also at the same time having an enabling international and national framework that encourage that to happen and that allocates the sufficient resources, the capacity, and all the resources that are needed for that data to be collected. So kind of the conclusion and hearing my colleagues is we're still a little bit behind on loss and damage. We need to catch up. But fortunately, there is a lot of interest both from governments and civil society to make that happen.
Great, thank you. And just coming back here, we have one more comment from Saleha.
So we are talking more about the women. So one good news from Pakistan that our political and technical COP delegation is most of the time is women. So this time is also a woman. So we are hoping much more inclusive gender data in our COP negotiations as well as in our NDCs. Yeah, thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for bearing a couple of minutes after our scheduled timings. But on behalf of all the co-organizers, we want to thank you so much for your time. We also want to thank you for your insights. This is your session that we're collecting your information to share it among each other. So we hope it's been informative. And as we noted earlier, we will be synthesizing these and sharing a report back that you'll be able to access soon on JADA's website in the coming weeks. So until then, we are wishing you a productive continuation, we hope, of COP engagements, and especially on gender equality and gender responsiveness. And we want to, of course, make sure that we are collectively making progress and impact. So thanks, everyone.